What's up, guys? Welcome to the Chuggin. My name is Josue, but you can call me Jesu. And today we're having a very, very cool guest on the podcast. We're talking about Carson Slovak of Atrium Audio and member of Star Wars cosplay cover band Galactic Empire. He has worked with bands like ERRA, Polaris, Lorna Shore, Red, and many more metal bands. This talk was very insightful, so remember that you can always pause the video at any point in time and go back so you get ahead of our talk. And I learned so many things from songwriting to mixing and mastering. He shares so many great and crazy stories on this episode, so really happy how it turned out. Also, if you feel supportive, you can either buy me a coffee or look at my Amazon wishlist with stuff that I need to make this project look and sound better. So I'm going to leave that in the description of this video and also on the comments. And before we get into the intro, I want to say thanks to the people that have supported this project so far, especially to the guests and the brands that have reached out. And talking about brands, this episode wouldn't be possible without our sponsor, Kreative Devices. If you're looking to buy a new laptop with big performance, but you're not willing to pay thousands and thousands of dollars, make sure to check out Kreative Devices laptop models. I got myself a Pro G16 model with a i7 12th-gen processor, 64 gigabytes of RAM, an RTX 3060 GPU, and 2TB SSD of storage. You can customize it with your own logo, which is really freaking cool. I'm going to leave the link to their website on the description too. Thanks again to Kreative Devices for sponsoring this podcast. Now let's go with the intro. On my favorite records ever, ERRA self-titled album.
Yeah.
Dude, it's such an honor to have you here. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and thanks for taking the time.
Oh God, man. Yeah, so I mean, whether a star, I'm ready to know more about you. So let's start with your background. So where you come from?
Yeah, Lidditz.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's in Lidditz right now. We've had a number of studios that we bounced around between over the last 15 years or so that have kind of been in this area. But yeah, our current and final studio is in Lidditz, PA.
That's great, man. So you guys, you and Grant, you're a great team, by the way. I just love everything you guys do. It's amazing, all
Thanks.
the work you put behind. Again, you guys have worked with my favorite albums ever, like Polaris, The Death of Me, to Call Right. I just love that album, man.
We mixed and mastered that record. Lance Prenc produced it.
Oh, great. Yeah, I love Lance too. It's amazing, like the tones he get from his stuff. And you too, I mean, that STL tones pack. I don't know if you saw the video I did with ERRA. That, dude, I just love how you guys managed to get that signature ERRA sound.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. I'm glad you like it so much, and you did a great job with that cover. It turned out great.
Oh, thanks, man. It means a lot to me. Yeah, it's really fun to play with, and God, man, yeah. So you guys offer engineering, production, right? Mixing, mastering, songwriting, arrangement, editing, rehabbing. I mean, you guys are all in like the whole box, right?
Pretty much, yeah. We'll do everything basically. So it's cool, it's been long road to get here, and we're just feel lucky that we can do this as a job, and we really enjoy it.
Right, man. Wow, it's amazing to see, like, you're just like two guys for what I know. It's amazing that you guys put like all that work behind for bands like crazy big bands that I love, and I just gotta congratulate you and Grant for doing such a sick job over all of your career. Yeah, so I just wanted to ask, like, how did you meet like Grant?
So that Grant actually was when he was in high school. He was in like a pop punk band, kind of like a Blink-182 type of thing. And they were like maybe the fourth or fifth band that I recorded when I was first starting out. And yeah, Grant's just always been, very obvious when he was, a teenager that he was an incredibly talented musician and songwriter. And
yeah,
I noticed that right away. And he and I just kind of kept in touch since I first recorded his band. This was probably in 2006 or 7, probably 2006.
Yeah.
So, and then we just kept in touch since then. And he joined another band called This or the Apocalypse around that time. And they did a lot of touring and released some records. And he got really good at songwriting and production on his own. I think that he was doing demos for bands in their practice space. So he was really cutting his teeth at the time and getting into production and getting really good at it. And, I was a couple years ahead of him in terms of that pursuit. We ended up doing a lot of projects together. I produced some records for This is the Apocalypse early on, and he was really involved in the process. He wrote a lot of the music on, their first few albums.
Right.
We ended up, he went on tour for years and did that whole thing. And then when he was ready to stop touring and just kind of settle down and focus on production, I just suggested to him, like, you should come work with me in my studio, and, you can work projects, I'll do my projects, and it'll be cool. And pretty soon after that, we realized that we work really well together as a team when we kind of team up on the same project. So he's had a real strength in vocal production. Yeah, he's kind of the vocal master here, and I'm kind of the guy who focuses on all the instrument stuff and most of the mix.
So that's interesting.
Yeah, kind of conquer and divide in that way. And we just developed a really unique workflow, where he'll be in one room working on only vocals and focusing only on that and making it the best it can be. And I'll be in the other room at the same time, like work instruments. And then we'll put our sessions together, and that's kind of how we work. So yeah, we did a project together maybe in like 2009 or 10, and it turned out great. And ever since then, we've just been kind of partnering up on all of our projects.
Wow, man, that's such a cool story, man. I mean, I was going to ask you, like how do you guys, like, I know you guys complement each other, but I didn't know like how you manage like to do each kind of work. For example, I was talking about you with Clint Tustin in my second episode, and it was great, man. I just love that self-titled album, man. And about those other production behind the vocals, and so about Grant, I would like to know, like, how does he get like all of those little stuff, like harmonies and like all these layers, like how does he manage to do that? Like it sounds like killer. Everything seems to be like put in the box, like really good. And how do you manage to do that?
Well, in Grant's case, he's actually he was taught music by his mother at a very young age, because he's a music teacher at a college around here, and he has perfect pitch, so you can tell you what note it is.
Of course.
Tell you if it's like 5 cents sharp or flat. He's very exact, and it's a skill that I've never had. And for vocal production, it's kind of the best thing.
Really useful.
Is able to come up with really interesting harmony layers, and he has a great intuition in terms of how to get the most out of a vocalist. He'll work really closely with vocalists, and and help them develop their ideas into something really great. And he's just always had a great talent for not only songwriting and production, but specifically for vocals. And I feel like when we started working together on projects and kind of putting our heads together on them, our quality of work we really raised the bar there, and got along when we started doing things together. So it's been a really productive kind of working relationship, and we both play to our strengths. I feel like I'm very focused on music production and mixing, and he's just always been a natural talent with vocal production. So it works out really well in our case.
Yeah, for sure, man. Yeah, I love it. I mean, you guys, again, you've worked like with my favorite albums ever. Like I'm talking like Lorna Shore, again, Polaris, ERRA, August Burns Red. I mean, you guys have the whole collection of my favorite productions. And again, I'm really, really honored to have you here. And again, so I want to talk about Galactic Empire, because I know of course, you gotta be like a Star Wars fan, just thinking about this one, but so can you talk to me more about it? So in case people don't know, this gentleman right here has a Star Wars, how can I explain it, cosplay instrumental band that is called Galactic Empire, and they tour like worldwide, over 10 million views with national press coverage and all the thing. It's amazing. Can you talk to me more about it? I would love to hear.
Yeah. So back in maybe mid 2015. It's crazy to think about it being that long ago, because it doesn't seem like that long ago. But 2015, Grant and I think it started with, to begin with, we're both big Star Wars fans. We both have been since we were kids. We kind of grew up on those movies.
Yeah.
And we're also huge fans of John Williams, and the music that he made for basically every movie he's worked on has always been incredible. He's just, one of the greatest composers of all time, in our opinion. Always had, huge respect for his work and the music that he wrote. Back in about it might have actually been 2014, when Grant, he thought it would be cool, a fun thing to do, to make a drum cover of the Imperial March.
Oh, yeah.
was he took, because he's a drummer, he's a really good drummer, and he took the original song from the movie and basically made a drum arrangement and played drums over it. And he put that video on YouTube, and it was just kind of, it was there.
That's so cool, man.
Yeah, we always thought that it was a really cool drum arrangement that he wrote.
Yeah.
About a year later in 2015, I think we had like a couple weeks where we didn't really have a project going on and we had some free time. And somehow we just thought it would be cool to replace the orchestral score that he played drums to with guitar and just parts on guitar along with what he came up with on drums. And
that's so clever. Yeah,
that was the first song that we did. And it turned out so cool that we're like, well, we should just do this for all of the Star Wars songs because there's so much cool material. Pose it note for note to guitar. It just sounds kind of like really weird progressive metal, which was interesting. And so, that was kind of the template. We decided to really be 100% true to the original song and try to represent like every note that we could hear, that we could decipher that was going on. So it's note for note, tempo is the same, everything.
Right. Yeah.
Played on guitar, but then he has these really cool drum parts over it. And that was kind of the template for the band. And we got to a point where we had recorded maybe 4 or 5 of these main Star Wars recognized.
Right, yeah.
And it just kind of snowballed into a thing where we're like, well, we've done this, we have this, maybe we should release it. And then we were like, well, maybe we should make a funny music video where we dress up like Star Wars characters.
Cool. Yeah.
And a music video for the, one of these songs. And so we did, and it happened to turn out that the end of 2015 is when episode 7, The Force Awakens, was about to be released.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we had actually finished this first music video we shot for the main theme song, like a couple weeks before the movie came out. And we realized at the time, like, oh, this movie's about to come out. Maybe we should just wait and release it on the day the movie comes out. So that's
a great idea.
And it instantly just went super viral. News sources were covering it. It got, millions of views on Facebook and YouTube, and turned out great. And then it just we always kind of make the joke that, this band is kind of like a joke just gone way too far.
Yeah.
And it just kind of naturally developed into this thing where now it's an actual band, and we started playing shows and started, we built costumes for ourselves, and
that's great, man.
Totally DIY. I actually made the costumes myself in my basement.
Really?
My mom did the sewing for the software.
Oh, wow.
And, it was just really cool, and it was like a fun thing for us to do, but it stuck around, and we ended up doing, many more music videos and going on tour and getting to, we got to go to Japan, we got to go to Australia.
Wow.
It's just been a great project, and it's always been fun. It's,
of course,
it was never the type of thing where it was like any kind of burden or something that we had to totally rely on,
Yeah.
It's always been just on the level of like, this is fun. And we've been having a great time with it. When COVID happened, the band became inactive, obviously.
Right.
Many bands did. And basically right when the pandemic started was when Grant and I started building our current studio that I'm in, and that whole process took about 1.5 years. The band wasn't active at all. And just this last year, we got, the whole thing going again.
Yeah. Great.
New costumes. And now the band's like pretty much touring full time again.
Cool.
It turned out great, and we feel lucky that we're able to still, be involved in such a fun project.
Wow, man, that's such a crazy story. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you guys managed to do that. Yeah, like you just guys started like as a joke, and then it turned out to be more of a serious thing, maybe something that maybe had, right, like more potential that you thought it would.
I mean, we really didn't expect it to be anything. We just thought it would be a fun thing to do and put on YouTube, but it definitely got a reaction, and a lot of people were, basically immediately asking us like, well, when am I going to see this live? And we had never considered like making it an actual band or playing it all.
Yeah.
And but that was a cool challenge because it forced us to really think outside of the box and come up with solutions like, well, how are we going to play in these costumes? Is Disney going to sue us or something like that?
Yeah, I was talking about that with a friend. Like he was asking me like, what about Disney? Have they talked with them or what?
Yeah, we haven't heard a word from Disney actually in 8 years. So I know that there are people that work at Lucasfilm that are fans of the band.
Oh, wow.
It's one of those things like there's a huge fan community.
Yeah.
Especially. And
yeah, of course.
what we do is obviously it has a funny element to it. It's a little silly, but it's also like music that we have a huge, respect for, that we want to just, we don't.
Of course.
I always hate it when, someone covers a song and it's not, doing it full justice. And one thing that was super important to us from the beginning was that, it's a tribute to John Williams. That's why we wanted to play everything note for note and exactly how he wrote it, and not really change anything or add anything, that was out of place or.
Of course.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree, man, with you. Like, of course, like whenever I'm making like a cover of the song, I'm just think like, I just gotta have the essence of it, right? Like, whether that's tone or, like you say, like the notes, the idea behind, like, it's gotta, like you say, like pay justice for it, right? So yeah, amazing, man. I'm really glad you guys managed to do this, something like that. It's such a cool band, and I'm really excited for like new stuff you guys gonna put out in the future. So
yeah, I'm excited. So, yeah. We've got a lot of plans, actually. We've got a 4th record almost in the bag, which maybe in the next year or so. We'll
can't wait, man. And you also produce and mix, I believe, all of your stuff. So. Yeah, so talk about mixing, man. So the way I heard about you guys and found about what you guys do, it's Nail the Mix, just where I managed to do, right, like that ERRA cover. And I was like, God, man, like there's so much stuff you gotta learn, like to make. So many technical stuff. Yeah, talk about technical. I've read comments, I don't know if you guys have done it, but I've read comments in your videos, like people saying, oh, like this is too edited, or like the guitars are like they're doing too much to it, and it doesn't feel like natural. And I'm just like, what? Like I feel like it's like the opposite thing. Like they're trying to get that essence of the sound, and they manage to, right, like get that signature sound for the band, which is what I think you guys do best. Like you guys have managed to make those albums get that signature sound of the band, make them represent what they sound like, right? So can you talk to me more about it? Have a few thoughts about it? I think it's kind of dumb, like to ever think like that. I don't know.
It's a subjective thing. I don't personally like it in most contexts when things sound too edited.
Right.
But I think at the same time, as a producer, the goal is to create the best version of the song that you're able to represent the intent of the song. And however you need to get there, that's how you get there.
Right.
I've never had any kind of moral objection to, editing something. I think that a lot of times that's kind of arbitrary, where that line lies. I would say effectively, if you can listen to the song finished as a whole and you can hear every part that's intended to be heard the way it's supposed to be heard, that should be the goal. If you need to edit a bunch of stuff to get there, then that's fine. I've always embraced technology. What people can do with recordings these days is so different than even 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And, it's interesting to see, but at the end of the day, it's a subjective thing. I think in the case of like Galactic Empire, for instance, all the guitars are super edited to the grid. I mean, everything is pretty perfect.
Yeah.
But the thing you have to consider is the nature of that music. At any given time, there's like 12, 16 tracks happening all at once. And that's
of course
in an orchestral arrangement, you have, motifs and themes that are being played by different sections of the orchestra. And a lot of times they're playing the exact same thing, but just in different octaves. So, we have a lot of guitars that we sneak in there with like 2-3 octave layers of playing the same line. And for that to work in a production and a mix and not just sound jumbled like a mess, you have to have those parts so locked in with each other. Because we want it to sound like one thing. If we have 4 guitar parts that are playing the same thing in different octaves or like harmonies, if they don't lock in really well, it will sound like a mess in terms of that music. Now, that's not to say that should happen for every record. We kind of try to assess, every band is different. Everyone has different vibe. Everyone has a different musical.
Of course.
Some bands come in and they want to sound perfect, and we're able to do that. And then there are other bands that come in and they want to sound completely live. And we've done a lot of that too. It really just depends on the scenario, like what the specific music calls for, what the band's goals are, Like, so for instance, we produced a record for the band Candlebox a couple years ago. And I would say 90% of that record is all them in one room together playing live.
Oh, wow.
And there wasn't like a bunch of drum editing or like sample replacement. It wasn't
like
really
raw.
It was more about the feel If something was a little out of tune, but it felt good, we left it. That,
Right.
and we did minimal overdubs and recorded vocals separately. But like most of that record is, a band in a room playing live, and it suited it for that record. Galactic Empire, on the other hand, isn't that band. Like that wouldn't work for us.
Of course.
It's supposed to sound like an orchestra of guitars, basically.
Yeah.
So in order for that to get across and not just sound totally messy, we kind of have to do it a certain way, to get the music sounding how it should sound, in our opinion.
Right.
Like I said, that's just one of those things. I've never had a problem with editing if it's called, but sometimes it's not needed. Sometimes you just nail the vibe, you get the right take, and that's that. And, every project is different, but, people's opinions on that are valid,
Right.
One has what they like and what they don't like. Some people really don't like the sound of super tight edited records, and some people do.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because you managed to explain that really well, because that's what I was thinking. I was like, I mean, at the end, if it sounds good, like if you get to the end result, I mean, that's what else can you ask for? So what are your biggest influences when it comes to mixing, mastering?
I've got a lot.
Yeah, I know. That's why.
Hard to pick, one, or even a few, but I would say in general, without like naming names, there are albums that just, they feel a certain way, they like,
right.
It's hard to describe in terms of production. That's kind of how I listen to music when I'm listening for production, is like, does this suit the music that's happening?
Right.
And there's, a lot of records that kind of miss the mark in that regard.
Yeah.
But then there are a lot that are just perfect records that you can't imagine sounding any different than they do, just because they're so specific. And, a lot of them are also just kind of snapshots of a period of time,
Of course.
Heavy metal music sounded way different 20 years ago than it does today.
Yeah.
And, there's a weird thing, like you want to keep up with that, but then you also, you want to basically serve the song at the end. Sometimes that's kind of a throwback vibe. Some bands want to sound like the early 2000s metalcore, but others want to sound, super modern and, layers, glitch effects and all this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of a crappy answer, but, I feel like if it feels right for what the band is trying to do musically and creatively, then that's the goal. That's
the goal. Yeah.
I don't think that you can apply a mix template to every band. I mean, every single recording is going to be different.
Right.
You can do a lot of things the same way. At the end of the day, you need to dial it for this specific song.
That's clever. I mean, I believe that's why, again, like talking about the steel tones, like with your pack. So I feel like what you're explaining right now, explain it really well with what I was trying to get, for example, with that pack, because you guys have lots of presets. So I believe they're used for different scenarios. So that's for example, a good way. Just saying this, I'm not a sponsor or anything by them. I just love the tool. I'm saying all this because I'm starting to learn 2 months ago, and I'm loving it. And I'm glad. Yeah, dude, I'm glad we have these tools right now. That I can make something sound like you guys, and be like, oh yeah, that reminds me of, it gets that, like what you're saying, the essence of how you want to sound or band wants to sound like. So that's great, man. Yeah, so something I saw you guys have, again, talking about tools, is that Drumforge pack. So can you talk to me more about it? Because I know all this thing about drum replacement and all this kind of thing, but I don't know how does it actually work? Why do people do it, and what is this something you guys?
Well, I think piggybacking off what I was just talking about, there are some productions where you want it to sound modern, you want it to sound very powerful. There's this vibe where the drums punch through, in a really specific way and have that kind of impact. And it's hard to really do that with just all acoustic drums. Layering in samples with the drums that are there, or a lot of bands these days will just straight up program all of their drums. For some music that really works for, and it would be weird to try to do that music with, all natural sounds.
Right.
And the drum plugin is like you said, it's just another tool. We worked really hard on it and tried to get, really good tones. We actually ended up trying to record that plugin several different times, and trial and error kind of thing. We would notice there's a buzz in this mic, or we didn't get this one articulation. We learned a lot through the whole process, and it was a lot just kind of trying again. But I'm really happy with what we ended up coming up with, and I'm glad we waited to be in our current studio with our current drum room to record that in, because I think it turned out great. And I love the way this room sounds for drums. It's definitely my favorite room that we've had access to. But yeah, I mean, for certain types of music, if a band is going for a really modern, metal or radio rock kind of sound, that's just part of that sonic stamp is, samples being blended in with the drums. And it's essentially just to enhance, the impact and enhance the power.
Of course.
But again, it's so band dependent.
Yeah.
And I've always, my kind of favorite recordings in that regard are the ones where it sounds natural and it doesn't sound too sampley, but it's got the power and the impact of what you get when you blend samples in.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's like anything else. It's just another tool in the toolbox that you can use to achieve a certain vibe if that's the vibe you're going. But I also love it when we, get the chance to work with bands who want to do all natural stuff and they enhance music really well. Because, that always makes it even more of a specific vibe because recording in the room acoustically is what you get. So, there's no cutting corners with it. You have to focus on really getting good tones from the start and making sure the playing is great. The most important thing is just the actual playing.
Of course.
If you edit stuff super tight, you still have to get good takes.
That makes total sense, but dude, like I would love to get into that, try new stuff. Like I've been working just again with sample drums, like GGD, that kind of stuff. But I would love to get like that, get to record like an actual acoustic. I don't know. I know I will learn a lot of stuff about it and then replay stuff and see how it reacts and how it complements the sound of it. So yeah, really good stuff. I would love to try it. I'll let you know when I do, so you can give me your opinion. So we're talking all about this, and you can see that I'm making all these questions a little bit more to the educational side because that's what I'm trying to get with this podcast, to be more educational, like a support for musicians who maybe are like me, they're just new into mixing and they just love all these albums, all these producers, and they do not know where to start. Or so I wanted to ask you about that. If you were 20 years old again, like me, and you just wanted to get into mixing, where would you start? What advice would you give to this type of musician?
Well, I always feel like, I never went to school or anything for music production. It was just kind of an interest that I, really latched onto. And I feel like I spent a lot of time kind of reinventing the wheel while learning kind of basic things.
Yeah.
And went kind of around the long way when, there were a lot of resources I wasn't even aware of that, could have helped me, get there faster. I think things like Nail the Mix, all of the YouTube tutorials, or even just interviews, podcasts like this with, people you're a fan of their work can be incredibly helpful. And I mean, I've always learned everything that I know to this point just by watching how other people do it. If I'm a fan of someone, I'll look into, their approach and their philosophy behind it, listen to interviews. I wish that I would have had a resource like Nail the Mix specifically when I was first getting into recording, because you learn so much just by seeing how a variety of people do it, and everyone does things differently.
Yeah.
There are a few kind of best practices that people accept, but every mixer has a different approach, a different thinking about things. And it's just great because it's a great cross section of a lot of different approaches. And how I've always learned is by seeing how other people do certain things and then figuring out, that I can implement that into my workflow and it will work. Other things maybe don't make as much sense, to you. Again, it's so subjective. It's so specific to your particular workflow.
Yeah, I get.
Yeah, I think just listening to people and watching, how they approach mixing in particular is, very important. Because I mean, I've watched a couple of the Nail the Mixes and learned a lot of things. And I've been doing this almost 20 years.
Right.
You never stop learning. But that's the thing. And as technology turns over, you have to keep up and you have to force yourself to learn new things and not get stuck in just this has always worked in the past, so I'm going to stick with that.
Yeah.
I've wanted to always be getting gradually better at what I do. I feel like if you ever decide that all of a sudden you're the best at this and that you want to just stop there, then you're probably, going to get left behind. I just think having all the internet and resources there were more limited resources back when I started getting into this. There were Leap forums that everyone would read. There were YouTube videos, obviously, but having something like Nail the mix specifically, where you actually get to watch the entire process of finish by someone that, whose work you appreciate. It's a hugely valuable resource for learning. It's, I just wish that I would have had that back in 2006.
For sure. Yeah, that's great, man. Yeah, great advice. Actually, I wanted to make other questions. So how about, I was thinking about this just right now while you were talking about, getting into tutorials and all that, but how about maybe getting to be an assistant to a producer like you guys, maybe find a local studio that maybe you like the sound, the things they do, and you want to learn more like deep dive stuff, like see the actual process of you guys doing your work. So how about that? What's your opinion on it?
I think that's a hugely valuable thing to put time into. If you can get an internship at a studio or with a producer or a mixer that whose work you like, I think that's the most valuable thing you can do. I think that this is kind of a field where you learn best by doing. You just have to immerse yourself in the process. And,
that's right.
Even just being a fly on the wall, you learn a lot. We've had a lot of interns throughout our whole career where most people will come in and for school credit or something, but just being in the room, everyone walks away feeling like they learned something new, which is super valuable to me. I think that's what, it's very useful to be able to be there and see the process in person and problem solve, on the fly. And that's how you learn best in this industry, I think. I mean, you sometimes I wish I would have gone to school for it because I feel like I learned a lot of like basic technical things a lot faster than it. But, at the same time, I'm thankful that I did it the way I did it, and that Grant, followed the same path just by kind of like learning by doing, trying something a million times and screwing it up a million times until you finally get it right and figure out what the problem was. And I feel like that's the way things stick in your head the best, is by screwing something up and then finally getting it. And then you're way less likely to forget.
Right.
Yeah. I feel like, Clinton he interned for us like years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He was one of our interns, and he was in Empire for a while.
Yeah. I know that. I knew because we talk about it. I don't know. I mean, you probably know this story, but he basically told me like he got like a cut or something. I don't know, like he was bleeding maybe because of the mask or something like that. I don't know. It was like crazy stuff.
So he spilled blood for this team.
Yeah, literally. I was like, what? It's so funny. But yeah, man, so you were talking about like getting to be an assistant maybe for engineer and getting to production and mixing. But what about like mastering? I've always been like, I feel like such an intimidating thing maybe for a mixer or new mixer, like make stuff sound better, right? Make it top notch. Like maybe that could sound like a little weird right there. So how will you go about mastering? Like if you were just like starting up?
Well, I think, we do mastering. I wouldn't consider myself on the level of some people who are only mastering engineers.
Yeah.
There's something to be said about having, the time and the budget to have that outside party come in and put the finishing touches on a recording. And, we do that whenever we can, when budget allows, where a band's able to get a separate mastering engineer to work with what we produce. Because, it's just great to get that other set of ears on it. And mastering can really make or break a recording. Some people kind of overdo it with the squashing the limiter and making everything short. And, I've certainly been guilty of mastering a little bit too loud, before asked. But it's a very kind of a very fine art, and I don't consider mastering like one of my huge strengths. I understand the ideas behind it. I've obviously mastered a lot of our recordings, but I still think it's valuable to, whenever it's possible, to get that kind of third-party opinion on it and get someone's ears on it. That's one of the great things about Grant and I, the way we work together, because 90% of the time we're in different rooms doing different things. So we have, relative objectivity when I walk into the room and hear what he's been working on, kind of objective ear coming into it. And I can say, this is great, or maybe this needs work. And he can do the same with what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
So we kind of have that extra ear built into our workflow, which is nice. But I think mastering is obviously a very crucial element in the whole process. And, I love working with outside mastering engineers whenever it's possible. I would say most of the recordings that we do, I end up mastering, but, I do think there's something to be said about an outside.
Okay. Yeah. I think that's a really great advice. Yeah. I actually would love to, have new ears to listen to my music and just also to learn, right? Because you can learn, I believe, when you get that back to you, right? Have you ever thought how do you make this? How is this is sounding different from what I did, right? I believe that's real, yeah, like you said, really crucial. So yeah, I would love to get into that. I would get started more like a mixing, and then I'll go with the mastering stuff.
Yeah, mastering is just kind of that's a whole world unto itself, and people don't realize kind of how much actually goes into that and the nuance, and it's a very, specific thing. Mastering isn't just like throwing a limiter at the end of a chain and a certain loudness level. Like there's a lot of consideration that goes into that process, and it takes someone with really, nuanced way of listening to things to do that. I would say my strength is more in the production and mixing end of things. So yeah, that's why, I think it's great to work with outside people whenever possible.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. That's great, man. Yeah, so yeah, like you said, you talk about mixing, production, mastering. How about songwriting? So you made songwriting for bands, right? So what's your process? What's your songwriting process?
That's always fun when we get to write with a band, because it's basically just everyone sitting in a room and trying to come up with ideas together, And that can be a really fun process. Sometimes it can be, arduous, sometimes it can take a long time and sometimes even be frustrating. But if you all have a common goal and you're all kind of on the same page with like what the song should sound like, the vibe should be, what the lyrics are saying, how to say that, because there's so many different ways to express things musically and mix things with words. And, it's not easy to do, even very simple songs like radio rock songs and stuff, they're some of the hardest things to write because it's so open, you can't hide behind technicality. Yeah. You can't hide behind flashy stuff with like radio rock in particular. It's more just like, what do you do with space and how is the message coming across? Like what is the vocalist saying? Do they mean it? That's the most important thing from a songwriting perspective, is that can you come up with something to say and say it in a way that seems like you mean it, that seems clear and authentic, and that's a different thing for every band. So it's always a new challenge when you're trying to write with a band. But the process is a lot of fun. Basically, we'll, most of the time we'll work in Grant's room because he's set up for basically vocals over there. And, we'll kind of come up with riffs. Usually we'll start with a guitar part and then build on that. And then it'll change a little bit. We'll just see where the song takes us. Most of the time we try to let the song kind of write itself and start with a very simple idea or theme or even just like one part. And then just kind of see where it naturally feels like it should go from there. And the whole time, we'll be coming up with vocal ideas too. So maybe we'll say like a chorus part idea, like a chord progression. And maybe it'll sound like a pretty, standard chord progression that you've heard before. But then like the challenge becomes, what can you do with that to make it more interesting, make it to seem like something you haven't heard before. And that's really hard to do, especially with rock music, because it's way more simple structurally and just melodically than like some of these crazy metal bands where the interesting thing about it is how crazy it is. With some genres of music, it doesn't work like that. We write with this band called From Ashes to New a lot. We've co-written with them for a number of albums, and that's always, a really interesting process because, we'll come in and we'll start with like one riff. And then we'll program some drums over it and we'll program bass over it and hear it. That's like, okay, so now we have this. Now where do we go from here? What does this naturally feel like it needs to go into? What should the next part be? And like, just kind of piecing together very slowly, like all of the elements of the song and then changing things around and then reassessing parts and then, arguing over parts and then fixing them. And, sometimes, you'll get into a thing where you're spinning your wheels and you're working on something for several hours. And then you end up going back to the original idea. That happens a lot. Everyone. Sometimes it just takes that process of going around the block to end up at the same place. And you needed to do that to figure out why the original idea was good. And then other times, a song where it starts out, we'll finish, a rough idea for a song one day and then come back to it the next day with fresh ears and realize that a million things need to change. And it's so obvious with a little bit of time and perspective away from it. So it's kind of like, just a constantly moving target. But again, it's just a totally intuitive process, And, Grant and I, we have the thing, like the goosebump effect. Like, that if you make a song and it gives you goosebumps on your arm, then you've done something right. Once in a while you'll get that and it'll be like, oh, I just got goosebumps without even trying. And so that says to me that like something special is happening here in music, So yeah, it's just, but then, we'll write with other bands and it'll be a completely different process than other bands, aside from them. And it's a very interesting part of what we do because there's so many variables and there's so many, different ways to approach it and go about it. But I think our kind of core perspective is, just do what feels right for that particular song, and keep working on it until it feels totally right, until it's undeniable,
Right.
By the end of the process, you should be able to listen to the song and be like, this is 100% sick. It is undeniably good. But then that's also the other problem with that is knowing when to stop.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I was going to ask you that because, I can imagine it's just how much work he gets into it.
And especially with, the way records are made now with Pro Tools and everything, sky is the limit. You can change something forever. The question you need to be able to answer is this a lateral move or is it an improvement?
Yeah.
And when is something done? With any artistic pursuit, that's always the dilemma is like, when do you call something finished?
Yeah, but can you answer that? Like how do you know? Like, how do you know like something's actual an improvement or it's just like...
I think it's in kind of just that feeling, Like I said, it's just an intuitive feel. But the interesting thing is it's hard to define, but like when you know, when something feels like it is complete, there's a switch in your brain that goes, this is done now. The skill is being able to recognize when that switch goes. And I've definitely been guilty of spinning my wheels on stuff and kind of pulling my hair out over certain song ideas that don't feel right for whatever reason. But then maybe I'll go and not listen to them for a week and come back to them, and my whole perspective will be different.
Yeah.
You have to just realize that and not get yourself into a wormhole mode where you're going down a certain path that is not going to be an improvement and you spend hours and hours doing it. That can be a very frustrating, but like I said, sometimes that's necessary for you to realize.
Right. Well, man, that's a great advice, and you had so much info because it's really interesting, like with songwriting, because I'm getting into that too. Like of course, like that's one of my favorite stuff to do, like songwrite and I'm gonna again a lot into that. And so I wanted to ask you, when you get into songwriting and you have like an idea, this has happened, I believe this has happened to you a lot, and you're like, oh, this sounds like this band, or you're like, I just literally just copy like an idea from that guy or that dude, and you're just like, no, I'm just not gonna do it, or you're like stuck, you're like, what am I going to do with this? Like, how you go about that?
Well, that's increasingly becoming more difficult because there are so many bands and it's hard to do things that sound and feel new musically,
right?
Because so much ground has already been covered. We're at the point like right now today where the most music that's ever been available is available.
Yeah.
More music coming out every day. It's hard not to do something that feels like it's been done. I think the trick is if you can take something that feels familiar, but do it in a new and interesting way. It's very difficult to do that, but I think you can nail that. That's where you want to be, because there are a lot of bands that I think just kind of read the room and say this is popular right now, so I want to kind of do this same type of thing, and that's easy to do. Just copy some other band that's popular at the time. Hard to do is to do something that feels like it's in the same arena, but is done in a fresh way. And it's a very ambiguous kind of thing to be able to nail down. It's worth it when you do. We've written tons of songs that have been inspired by certain bands or certain songs. But the challenge then becomes like, okay, we don't want this to be a direct ripoff. How do we get this similar vibe, but do it in our own way, and do it in a way that's like specific to the band that's doing it. And that's difficult. It's difficult.
It's hard.
Yeah. It's so much of it is just kind of gut feeling, when something's good, it's good.
Good. That's right, man.
If you find yourself having to convince yourself that something's good, then you need to revisit it and work on it a little bit.
Great advice, man. Yeah, that actually, like, I got my answer to that, because I have lots of ideas, like just like my phone, and I'm just like, what am I going to do? Like, I guess it's just hard to make it sound original, but I know I can make it. I know I can manage to do it. So thanks for that. It's gonna help a lot. So
that quick, sorry to cut you off, but I just one more thought. I feel like getting good at songwriting and production, it's like exercising. You have to do it every day. You have to work on something new every day. And maybe you go through 100 song ideas that aren't great, but then if you get one, then you've gotten better. And that's like, if I could give any advice, it's like, obviously it's hard to do with everyone's schedules and everything, but like, if you really want to become a songwriter, like, write one song a day and do that for as long as you can. And then a couple months will go by and you'll listen to that first song you wrote on day one, and then you'll listen to the last song you wrote yesterday, and it'll be a stark difference, and you'll have learned so many things through that whole process. It's a lot of work, but like, if you really want to get good at something, it's like anything else, like exercising your body. You just have to do it so much and so frequently that you learn by doing.
Yeah. great. Like, yeah, it's a hard thing to do, and you just got to put the work in, and yeah, it's an everyday job, right?
Yeah.
To be a songwriter.
Yeah. And, Grant and I consider ourselves really lucky. We've gotten the opportunity to work with a lot of really interesting and diverse bands. People associate us with a lot of like heavy metal type stuff.
Yeah.
But we've gotten the chance to work on all kinds of music, and that's always, I like heavy music, and I like a lot of the bands that we work with that are in that genre.
Yeah.
It's always a treat to be able to work on something that's not anywhere close to the metal genre, because it forces you to think outside of the box, do creative problem solving, come up with solutions that maybe you haven't had to deal with that much, because you're not in that genre that much. And that's always like a really valuable learning experience, that whole process of just doing something that you're not used to. That's how you grow kind of as a musician and songwriter.
For sure, man. Yeah, I mean, it's such a great experience right now, man, like to get your feedback and for all these questions I just had, like for, the whole year. I've just waited for this moment. Like, again, you're my favorite producer ever. So
thank you so much.
So before you go, I want to just do like a couple more questions. So I would love to know about gear. How do you choose what gear to use for, let's say, certain song or album? So how do you go about that? Like, just want to use this amp or this cab or this mic. I would love to know your take on that.
Yeah, I think mic selection it's one of those things where like there are kind of some standard practices. Like it's kind of a no-brainer to put a SM57 on a guitar cab, right? I mean, it's going to sound good. If you can dial in the tone and the playing is good, it's going to sound great. I love to, every session that we do, I try to experiment a little in some way if I can, where, I'm choosing a different mic for this, or, I go about, thinking about dialing in a tone in a different way. Just to keep it interesting. I think that your ear is going to gravitate to what it wants to hear. If you have a certain way that you think of, like, okay, a heavy guitar should sound like this, kind of frequency balance. Sometimes it's nice to get outside of that and be like, well, what if it sounded like this instead? And would that sound cool in this context? And you try different stuff out, and if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. But I've learned a lot just by randomly trying different stuff that you wouldn't think.
Great.
And I feel like sometimes that produces a really unique result that, you wouldn't have gotten otherwise. If you're taught, like, we'll always have to mic a guitar cab with an SM57, then that's going to be your sound for the rest of your career. If you don't get out of that and maybe try some different stuff. I like when, we have a couple really nice drum kits here at the studio, and I know they sound great. I like when bands bring their own drum kits though, because, then things will always be a little bit different. If they can't, for whatever reason, bring their own drum kit and we're recording live drums, we'll obviously use one of our kits. Very familiar, like our main DW kit we've had forever. It sounds, very specific, and I know exactly how it sounds. I know how to tune it to make it sound good. And, that's kind of like a constant. That's like an easy thing to dial in. But I like it when, we'll have all different kinds of equipment come in here, and it's always a treat to like try something out that I haven't tried before, so people will bring a guitar head in that I don't own, and maybe that I've never used before. And it's always like a cool kind of experiment to see what we can dial with that. And just, like I was saying, trying different mics that you wouldn't think of on different sources can be fun. I cycle through tons of different mic configurations for recording drums. I always change up maybe, one or two little things. I have my standards that like they're kind of go-tos where I know they're going to sound good. Like I know certain mics will sound good on like a snare or, room mic or whatever. But it's always fun to just try new things and try to mix it up a little bit. And I felt like every time I do that, I find something out that maybe I didn't think of before. But especially now, where there are so many, there's a lot of homogeny in, the way certain albums in certain genres sound, a lot of it can sound very samey. And that's why like people like Lance, like who we were talking about earlier. He's a great example of someone, every one of his recordings sounds a little bit different, but it's still got his kind of signature vibe to it. Which is just like this really raw, aggressive, but intricate, very detailed, very loud kind of character to the whole thing. But every recording, like it doesn't sound like other stuff that he's done. And that's what I think is an example of, a great producer mixer, when you can have a signature sound that's consistent throughout the different records you do, but no one record sounds exactly like the other one. It's not like you're just throwing up the same sets on everything and just going, here's my template, I'm just going to mix through that. Like my mixing template is basically tracks that are labeled that, maybe have like a basic EQ on them or whatever, and it's wrapped through my desk, and like I've got like the master master bus, laid out, but it's pretty much no more than that. I don't go off with like specific things that I know I'm going to use. I always like to, when I can and when we have the time, I always like to experiment a little bit and try to mix. But that's the challenge too, because like, it is easy to fall into these grooves where you start using, the same type of thing too much. And it's like, okay, well, this sounds exactly like that other. But then it's interesting too, because I've also tried, say pulling up like the STL tones, like the ERRA preset that you're talking about using on your cover. Like I've tried that preset with a couple different bands, and sometimes it sounds great and complements it perfectly. And then other times it sounds like shit. And I'm like, why doesn't this sound right? It's the same preset. But I mean, everyone's music is different. Everyone's is different playing. The takes that you get, the guitar they use, the way that they strum, all these little variables all add up. And it's just, you'll never get two recordings to sound exactly the same. You can get them close, but it'll never be the same, even with all the same presets.
I love that, man. Yeah, because that's the thing. I believe like presets are like a double-edged sword. Like, you can get the sound you want, but like you said, like it's not always going to work. So you have to manage to get an original sound, like find what works best for that particular song or album for this band. Yeah, I love what you're saying, man. And it really shows how much experience you have with all these things you do. And I love it, man. Again, I'm a huge fan. And before you go, we'll love to ask the last question, which is something I ask to every guest, which is who would you like to be on the podcast on the next episode?
Like suggestions for someone to be on?
Yeah, like it can be anyone, like producer, musician, someone you will love to hear on this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many people I'm a fan of. It's hard to pick one. I think it would be great if you talk to Lance, actually, because I think he's an example of a producer who, is very relevant right now. And he's done some really incredible work, and he's got a very unique style.
Right.
I respect that guy's work a whole lot, and I think he'd be a great interview. So.
Great. Yeah, I love him too. Yeah, the thing is doing, like, again, like you, like all the bands he's working with, my favorite bands, like, Alpha Wolf, Polaris, like all these bands. Love it. Love what you guys are bringing to the table on metal music industry, and I'm looking forward to see what's next. So thanks for coming, guys. This is the 4th episode of the Chuggin, Carson Slovak, and thank you again for coming so much. I'll be a huge fan. Thanks for coming, man.
Dude, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you taking the time, and it's a great conversation.